Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you had a good weekend and the weather treated you okay. I want to visit a topic that's about how we let people know that we're an expert. So give me some ideas on how we can let people know that we're experts. How can we let people know that we're experts? And the reason I bring this up is, first of all, at seminars, how much time should we spend, whether it's a webinar or a seminar or a small group or a big group, how much time should we spend talking about our expertise, and how much time should we spend letting them know all the letters that we have behind our names, that we're a CFP and we're an RCM and we're a blah, blah, blah. And I mean, how much time should we spend doing that? Because what do baby boomers think about you when you are, that's right, everybody's saying none. Good job, guys. So we don't want to tell people we're an expert, because when you tell a baby boomer that you have a PhD or that you're a doctor, they expect you to be a medical doctor. When you explain that you're a doctor in English literature, what do they think about you saying that you're a doctor? Yeah, they think you're ridiculous. They think you're ridiculous. So we don't want to tell people that we're experts. We want to show people that are experts. So I'd like to, one of the ways we do is writing upside down. But I want to show you another way you can show people that you're an expert really quickly. And that is this is a woman's trick to solve common math problems that's blowing people's minds. If you want to find, if you say, what's 16% of 50? Is that an easy thing to do in your head quickly? 16% of 50? No, that's not a very easy thing to do in your head. But the trick is this. You flop it. 16% of 50 is also 50% of 16. So how easy is 50% of 16? Easy. So when you're doing math in front of people in your head quickly, what do they think about you? When you can do math quickly, when you do 16% of 50 quickly in your head, what do they think of you? Yeah, that you're smart. That's showing them that you're an expert. That's showing them that you're smart. Exactly. So let's do this quickly. So 25% of 500 is the same as 500% of 25, which equals what? 5 times 25 is 125. Which one's easier, 25% of 500 or 500% of 25? How about 15% of 30 versus 30% of 15? 4.5. 15% of 30 is 4.5. 30% of 15 is 4.5. So that's just a little trick that you can have in the back of your mind when you happen to be talking to somebody and you want to do a quick percentage in front of a person to show that you're a genius. Make sense? Study doing this is a key to keeping people engaged in conversation. That's what we need to do, is keep people engaged, right? So if you're a psychologist, this might be an extra exciting for you to read a series of studies. And guys, are we psychologists? As financial advisors, are we psychologists? You better be. Yeah, exactly. A series of studies have discovered that the most effective way to stimulate others in conversation is not by sharing new knowledge or experience. So as most advisors out there, what do they want to do with people? Most advisors out there, what do they want to do? Give people what? New knowledge, new knowledge, new knowledge. So why is it then that one of the spouses checks out and doesn't even want to come to these meetings? Because they're not interested in new knowledge. And they found that instead of new knowledge and experiences, tell listeners things that they already know or are familiar with. So that's kind of, is that counterintuitive? To keep people engaged, you should talk about things they already know versus new knowledge. Is that, to me, that's right, John. That's what we're talking about stories. You're ahead of the game, John. You're about 2 slides ahead of what we're talking about. So I would think to keep people engaged, we want to talk about new things and new experiences. No. It ends up telling listeners that what they already know they're familiar with. And one of the other ways we see this is, do you remember, a long time ago, maybe 6 months ago, I talked about writing a top 10 song. What do you need to do to write a top 10 song? The song needs to be what? 95% familiar and 5% new. So and there's a lot of theory to that about how you do lyrics versus refrains versus whatever. But this is human beings like the familiar. Researchers at Harvard University and the University of Virginia conducted 4 related studies for their paper. The studies emanated from their anecdotal observations that conversations covering unrelatable topics often made the person you were talking to feel bored, confused, and underwhelmed. Would that be the case with some people when we're talking about all these charts and graphs and illustrations and hypotheticals that most advisors do? Yeah. So people are more engaged in conversation when they're already informed. Even more captivating was the second study, which showed that listeners expected to be more engaged if they knew nothing about the coming story. That's what we would think. Intuitively, we would think they'd be more engaged if they knew something of the nothing. If they knew nothing of the coming story, if it was brand new. Yet, in fact, the previously examined phenomenon happened again. Listeners hearing information that they already knew resulted in better engagement. 2 additional studies will examine why this is the case. Researchers arrived at the conclusion that familiar stories were easier to understand, thus allowing the listener to further comprehend and ruminate over the information. So do we use this theory, this science, in 5Q conversations? Heck yeah. We're going to talk about that here in a second. Since most of us can't properly describe what we actually see accurately, our friends are actually a whole lot happier when we tell them what they already know, because at least they understand what we're talking about. Guys, does that apply to us? At least they understand what we're talking about. We worry too much about thrilling our listeners and not enough about when we're confusing them. The results of studies are published in the Journal of Psychological Science. So think about the 5Q method. Why do we then, before making a major financial point, guys, we make major financial points every single day to ourselves, but how often are these people that we're meeting with, how often are they exposed to financial theories, methods, strategies? Daily or rarely? The people that we meet with, our prospects. Virtually never, right? So that's why we always start with a non-financial, a third-party story first, something that they can recognize, that they've experienced in their lives, that is familiar to them. So that's why with beneficiaries, we talk about, if I divide a pie, how many people would have been in a situation where they needed to divide a pie? Nobody or everybody? Everybody has been. So that's why we, instead of going right for, your beneficiaries, there's 3 kids and they're each divided by a third. See, there's a lot of stuff going on that we take for granted that's easy to understand. They don't take it that way. So we start out talking about something they're familiar with. So if I had a pie and I wanted to divide it equally between 3 people, how much would each person get? Well, they get a third of the pie. How about money manager fees? We talk about the gas station story. Has everybody been concerned about the price of gas? Everybody that you met, are they concerned about the price of gas? Yay or nay? Would they be mad if they found out a gas station was basically being untruthful with them? Is that something everybody can relate to? Risk reward. We talk about the apartment cable TV story. How many people have gotten that story wrong when you talk to them? So, the apartment gives you 100 channels for free, and then the cable company calls you and says, hey, how would you like to get 40 channels for $50 a month? How many people have chosen the 40 channels for $50 a month? So, and how quickly do they know the answer to that story? How quickly do they know the answer to that story? They have to really think about it almost instantaneously, because they make those kind of decisions every single day in their life at Target, at Walmart, at the grocery store, they make those decisions. So that's why we start with things they're familiar with. Umbrella liability. We talk about the backyard party story. Turnover costs. We talk about a company that turns over employees. Investment weight. We talk about grandma versus baby, inflation versus guys, when you start talking about inflation versus risk, is that something that everybody was trained in high school, college, and even if they maintained their knowledge of that through their life? No. But does everybody get that grandma's not buying green bananas because she's got less years to worry about, and baby is not worried about how much a house is going to cost because they're not going to be buying a house for a long period of time. So that's why we use those things. Manager tenure. Why do we talk about airline pilots? Would we want to be flying with a brand new pilot that had experienced no storms, never flown at night, never flown on instruments? Or do we want a guy like Sully who's been flying for 30 years, can fly through a flock of geese and land on a river? Which one do we want? So why do we use these stories? Because science tells us that that's what works best. Make sense? Because a lot of guys and gals wonder, why are we going through these things? It just seems like a waste of time, and why it's delaying getting to the bottom line of let's get them to move their money. So why do we do these things, Jeff?
Well, because that's how people learn. People learn through stories, and that's what people remember, stories. So if you want it to be memorable and you want them to really get it, you're going to have to use stories instead of just throwing facts at them.
That's right. And somebody said, Dick said his stories are engaging. And Jeff, why is it so important that they remember it? Because once they walk out that door, if we don't give them something they can remember, once they walk out that door, how long do they remember our facts and figures?
No, they don't. They don't.
But would they remember the Sully story 2 weeks later when I met with them again and brought up the Sully story? How quickly would they say, oh, I remember that?
Yep, they remember that.
Yeah. So Jeff brings up the exact point, which is it makes it memorable. It makes it we remember things that we understand. And we've talked about, are both spouses ever fully engaged on investments? Or is it one spouse usually takes care of the investments and the other spouse takes care of other things? But by telling stories like this, do we get both spouses involved by doing these stories? Do both spouses get these things? Yeah, that's why we do them. It engages them. Make sense? So we're about halfway through the Ray Dalio book, and are you guys still cool with me going chapter by chapter through the Ray Dalio book, or are you done with Ray Dalio and you don't want me to do this anymore? Yeas or no? Yeas, keep doing it. Nays, quit doing it. After today. Oh, everybody's saying yeah, good. Well, today we're going to talk about where Ray talks about work principles, or the principles you should be engaging at your workplace. So first thing starts with organizations are two things: people and culture. If you can have the best people in the world, but if the culture sucks, what kind of experience is your client's going to have? Crappy. You can have the best culture in the world, but if you have crappy people, what's going to happen? Crappy. So you got to have great people, and you got to have a culture. So what do you think he means by culture? It's really, and I hate mission statements. I think they're the stupidest thing that were ever invented. But there is a place for what do we believe as our company values? What do we believe as our company? What our company believes when it comes to taking care of people, when it comes to honesty, trustworthiness, following through, all that stuff. So people and culture. Tough love is effective for achieving both great work and great relationships. So when it comes to the people you're working with, your staff, your assistants, your 5Q and ECA, we are in fact employees of you. You've chosen to work with us, and so when it comes to working with ECA, when it comes to working with us, when it comes to working with your assistants and your receptionists and your underlings, etc., tough love is effective for both achieving great work and great relationships, which means what? You should be fair, but if you need, everybody needs to be on the same page. That's right. Everybody needs to be on the same page. So if we screw up at E5Q, if we screw up at ECA, if your assistant screws up, or your receptionist screws up, or your underling screws up, should you ignore it, or do you have to put that on the table and treat it fairly, effectively, professionally? But should you sweep it under the rug and say, you know what, I don't really want to get into it today, and it's too much energy and too much whatever, or do you need to deal with it in a fair and effective manner? You got to deal with it. Because if you sweep it under the rug, what's going to keep happening? You're going to be sweeping every single day. So tough love is effective for achieving both great work and great relationships. A believably weighted idea meritocracy is the best system for making effective decisions, which means what? People should be rewarded for bringing the most to the table. So the people bring the most to the table, they should be rewarded the most. That's the best system for making effective decisions. It's not because you like somebody better. It's not because they're a relative of yours. It's not because they've worked for you the longest. Meritocracy is the best system for making effective decisions. When you work with people whom you like and you admire because they're so good at what they do, it doesn't feel like work. It's like you're playing. So, at 5Q, we've probably, we have 4 people that work at 5Q, and we've probably gone through 10 people, 12 people to get to those 4 people. Because you got to find people that you enjoy working with, that there's good chemistry. Because even if you have, and we've had really qualified people that we had to let go because there were just the chemistry was not there. So you do have to have a certain amount of chemistry, and that everybody likes everybody in the office. It's not that they have to like them 100% of the time. We're all going to get in this situation where we're irritated with somebody, but but being irritated one day and being irritated daily is a totally different thing. You got to like who you're working with. How to trust in radical truth and radical transparency. When I say I believe in radical truth and radical transparency, Ray says, all I mean is we take things that ordinarily people would hide and we put them on the table, particularly mistakes, problems, and weaknesses. So we put those things on the table. We look at them together. We don't hide them. Why would assistants hide, receptionists hide, or underlings hide things from you? Why would they hide things from you? Why would you hide things from everybody? Fear for the job, fear you're going to yell at them, fear they're going to be mad. So when somebody makes a mistake, and we're going to get to this because this is a big point in his chapter here, is how we should treat mistakes. How we should treat mistakes. So that's one of the big things we're going to talk about. So his point here is we want radical truth and radical transparency. We want things that ordinarily people would hide, instead they would not hide. Ordinarily things that would hide under the table, we put them on the table, especially mistakes, problems, weaknesses. And if you talk to Jeff or Missy or Tricia or ECA, the thing that really makes me upset, the thing that really, really makes me upset is not a mistake. It's not a problems. It's not weaknesses. It's about, I've asked somebody to do something and then 3 months later, it's still not done. And when I say, why isn't it done? They give me all sorts of excuses on why it's not done. What do I tell them? So I gave them the assignment 3 months ago. 3 months later, I asked, where is this project? And they start giving me all sorts of excuses on why it's not done. What do I tell them? What do you think? What would you tell them if that happened to you and you were a supervisor? When should they have told me if this was a problem? Now, they don't do this anymore. They're awesome. But, it was growing pains that when we first started working together, these things happen. When should they have started to tell me they were having problems that were preventing them from finishing the project? Yeah, right away. Right away, because then guess what I could do? We could work through together how to fix it. Make sense? Never say anything about a person you wouldn't say to them directly, and don't try people without accusing them to their face. Bad-mouthing people behind their back shows a serious lack of integrity, is counterproductive. It doesn't yield any beneficial change, and it subverts both the people you're bad-mouthing and the environment as a whole. So that goes not only for your employees, but also for your clients. And Jeff and I have talked about this. Guess how many guys I've seen that make $500, $800, or $1 million a year, or $2 million a year, that when they do a seminar, tell me about the tire kickers and the plate lickers, and everybody was just there for the food. Guys that are making $5, $8 million, $2 million, how many of them say that kind of stuff? Does the words tire kicker and plate licker ever pass their lips? No. Because if you believe everybody's a tire kicker and a plate licker, guess what you got in front of you then? Tire kickers and plate lickers. You got to like the people you're working with. So bad-mouthing people behind their backs shows a serious lack of integrity. And what does it say to your staff? When your staff hears you say they're tire kickers and plate lickers, how is your staff going to treat prospects? How are they, we're back to culture. If you call everybody tire kickers and plate lickers and you roll your eyes and you have heavy sighs about the people showing up for your marketing, how does that tell your staff to treat those folks? With kid gloves, as the truly special, as the people who will make or break your business, or treat them like crap? like crap. And it's the same thing with your staff. Should you be badmouth? Again, radical truth, radical transparency. If you have a problem with somebody, it needs to be what? Talked behind their back or addressed up front? Addressed up front. If you want a smooth working organization, you need to be addressing people up front. Okay? If you don't, it subverts both the people you're bad-mouthing and the environment as a whole. But don't let loyalty, he also says, don't let loyalty get in the way of truth and well-being of an organization. So it's not all, unicorns and butterflies either. If somebody is doing something wrong, it's not that you don't want to badmouth them. You don't want to badmouth them behind your back. You want to instead talk directly to them about the problem and see if you guys can come together to create a positive outcome. If you can't working together create a positive outcome, then guess what? You have to shake hands and move, go your own way. But deal with these things up front. So it's not blind. You don't want to just be blind and ignore the problems people are, doing. But you don't want to be talking about it behind their back. If it's a problem, then get it out front and deal with it on the table. Don't just ignore it. You got to address it. Make sense? Your constructive criticism is always welcome. So that's where, and this kind of has to do with mistakes. But there's another side to people dealing with mistakes. That's how you deal with other people's mistakes. You also have to deal with how people deal with your mistakes, with their supervisor's mistakes, with their boss's mistake. Should you be defensive? Should you be defensive if your staff tells you you're making a mistake? Because if you're defensive, what will they not do? They'll never point out mistakes. Yeah. So Missy and I have worked together for over 20 years, and Jeff and Tricia and ECA can tell you that we have come to verbal blows. We don't so much anymore, but there have been times we come to verbal blows because I was I was criticizing something, one of her ideas, or she was criticizing one of my ideas, and we came to verbal blows. But we've been working with each other for so long. We both realized that once we come to verbal blows and we hang up on each other, and we haven't done this for years, but it used to be a regular phenomenon. When we'd hang up on each other or we'd walk out of each other's offices, we'd be back talking to each other 10 minutes later as if what happened? As if nothing happened. Yeah, and I'd always apologize to Missy and say, I'm sorry for biting you because, hey, I'm human just like everybody else. So when somebody attacks my idea, and was she attacking my idea or was she giving me constructive criticism? Constructive criticism, but how did I take it? As her attacking my idea. So after my natural human reaction was to do what? Again, not using 5Q skills. My 5Q skills should have said what? Exactly, Missy. That's exactly how I think, and tell her why I agree with her. That's not what I did. When I'm not in front of a client, I'm a natural human being. When I'm in front of a client, I am a 5Q machine. When I'm not in front of a client, I am a human being, and when she would criticize me, my knee-jerk reaction would be to defend aggressively. But afterwards, I'd say, sorry about that. Now that I've taken a breath and the points you brought up were good points and blah, blah, blah. You have to have some level of trust in each other that because the points she was making, I didn't follow every single point she made where she disagreed. Sometimes I said, yeah, I get what you're saying, but we're going to do it my way. But guess what? In 20 years, have there been times when she's, by her criticism, by her reminding me of past mistakes and things like that, has that saved me a ton of time, money, effort, and headaches? Her having the ability to bring those things, and yes, absolutely has. You have to have, and hopefully you'll have a much better way of handling it than I am. That people will be willing to give you constructive criticism. But everybody that works with me understands I'll take constructive criticism after I bark for about 5 minutes. But 10 minutes, 15 minutes goes by, then I'll settle down and I'll listen to what they said. And and a more normal. So don't do it my way, but do it some way. Make sure that they feel open to criticizing. Make sense? Make sure that they know that they can criticize constructively things that you're doing, ideas that you have, ways you want to go. Some of you have probably heard me say this. The year I made $967,000, I was making $50,000 a year. 3 years later, I'm making $967,000, and I decided to change everything. I was going to scrap the whole 5Q system, scrap the 21-point checklist, and start with this new great idea I had. And Missy at that point said, if you do that, I will quit. We spent 3 years getting this system in place. Now you want to scrap it for something that's untried. So how much money, time, and effort did she save me? We're talking about tens of millions of dollars that she saved me by putting your foot down and being willing to say that. Does that make sense? Share the things that are hardest to share. So we're asking you, and Ray's asking you, it's not easy to give constructive criticism. It's not easy to sit down with somebody if there's something they're doing is annoying you and putting it out there so that you can get on the same page. But people who are successful only do the easy things, or people who are successful do the hard things that unsuccessful are unwilling to do. You got to do the hardest things. Be crystal clear on what the deal is. Make sure people give more consideration than they demand for themselves. So, I can't remember what president it was, but there was a president back in the 1900s. There was some people who were wanted to be on his cabinet, and he was riding on a trolley car with this guy who wanted to be on his cabinet, and he watched the guy on the trolley car ignore an old woman, and sit down. And he was the guy that wanted to be in the cabinet was sitting down on the trolley car. All the seats were taken, and the guy purposely did not have eye contact, completely ignored the woman, so she had to continue to stand. I can't remember what president. It was one of the odd presidents, like Fillmore or something like that. Not a real famous president, but he saw that happen, went up, grabbed the lady, unbeknownst to the guy who wanted to be in the cabinet. The president took her back, put her in his seat, and what do you think the likelihood was that guy got a cabinet post? Didn't. So make sure people give more consideration than they demand for themselves. People today, as a whole, and I'm going to be critical of people, as a whole, do most people want more consideration given to them than they demand of themselves? I shouldn't say most, but do we see it often today where people are very self-centered. They want everybody to give them everything and they want to give nothing back. Don't be that person. Make sure you're giving more consideration than you demand for yourself. Make sure people understand the difference between fairness and generosity. Make sure people understand the difference between fairness and generosity. Fairness means what? Well, if you're fair, will you necessarily be generous? No. Fair is, we're back to meritocracy where we started this conversation, right? Meritocracy. So being generous is keeping somebody on your staff that ain't doing their job. That's generous because, they've got problems and they had us just got a divorce and they've got 2 kids to take care of, and then you got, hey, help them, but understand that you're helping them out of generosity, not because it's fairness and they're doing the right job. It's not a quid pro quo. It's you're being generous. But you have to understand that if you're being generous, should you expect anything from them then? When you're being generous, should you expect anything back? No. You're giving them a gift, and you should expect it. So having an assistant who's got a sad sack story and you're being generous by handling them, no, you can't do that. You have to do what? Keep them on because you're being generous, and then hire a real assistant and pay them fairly. Does that make sense? Because you can't have that person there who's not doing the job and think you're going to get the job done when you're being generous. Admit to yourself, I'm being generous. I'm keeping them on the payroll just because I know they're not going to do anything. If I get anything, I'm happy. But I need to hire somebody who's actually going to give me a fair amount of work for a fair wage. Does that make sense? Know where the line is about and be on the fair side of it. So I'll give you an example of this. One of my assistants before, when I was first starting to have some success, before Missy came on with me, this other assistant worked for another advisor. He told her that he'd pay her $10,000 per referral. So she referred somebody, and then he thought, geez, I don't want to be $10,000. All she did was give me the name. I did all the work. And guess what he did? Do you think he gave her the 10 grand? Because when push came to shove, saying it was one thing, but when he had to write the check for 10 grand, guess what? Yeah, he lost it. He didn't. He gave her 2,000, told her she should be happy with that. She quit, moved to me, and she gave me 3 referrals. In fact, one year that I made 50 grand, my entire 50 grand came from her referrals. So really, I made 100 grand that year, but I told her I'd give her a 50-50 split. If she referred to me, I'd give her 50-50. So when she referred to me, guess what I gave her? Made 100. Guess what I gave her? And it was hard. I was not rich. I was poor. But when I said I was going to give her 50, I gave her 50. So she got 50,000. I got 50,000. And I followed through. Because if I'd only think about this, if I did not follow through on that first one, guess what? I would have made 10,000, and she would have made 2,000. And how much poorer would I have been if I had not followed through? So know where the line is and be on the fair side of it. Be fair with people. Be a person of your word and pay for your work. Missy will admit that she is extremely well paid, and because what? If I didn't pay her well, guess how many people would love to hire Missy away? Everybody would love to hire her away. So I've always paid her extremely well. Treasure honorable people who are capable and treat them well even when you're not looking. It's kind of back to that if you promise somebody you're going to give a certain split, give that split. And Jeff and Missy both, if you can harp in or jump in here, have you had discussions with advisors who, after they had a good assistant, then kind of did change their mind because the assistant started to make too much money? In the last 20 years, has that happened a few times?
Absolutely. I have a lot of those conversations.
Yeah, and what's your conversation with them, Missy?
You have to pay them. You've spent all the time and effort training them, getting them to do the things that are going to make your life easier. You have to be willing to pay them. If
you don't, guess what? Well, Nick brings up a great point. Nick says, you know what? Same thing happened to me. That's why I left and started my own firm. That's what will happen to you. When you find a good assistant, guess what? You've trained them. You can either now keep them to make your life extremely easy and extremely profitable, or you're in danger of turning them into a what? Competitor. You don't want to do that. Keep people. Mistake. Are the stepping stones to learning? So mistakes are good things or bad things? They're good. Mistakes are good. Let assistants know that when they make a mistake, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. When you make a mistake, that's a good thing. As long as what? You can't make the same mistake twice. The second time you make it, it's no longer a mistake. It's a what? It's a choice. It's a choice of either I didn't want to focus on it, I didn't want to pay attention to it. It's not like it's a purposeful mistake, but if you make the same mistake, it's because you decided I'm not going to have that same focus on it. Guys, I forget who maybe Jeff can help me with this, but we had a running back in the Vikings, and he had a season where he fumbled. He was like the number one fumbler in the league. Guess what he did during the off season? He said, I'm going to make sure that I work on my ball handling skills. I'm not going to fumble. Now, he did fumble a couple of times the next year, but he went from like the worst fumbler to the player with the least amount of fumbles the next year. Not because he was a better player, not because he was stronger, not because he was ran slower or more carefully. Why did he go from being one of the worst fumblers to one of the people in the league that fumbled least? Focus. That's right, Tom. Focus, focus, focus. So making a mistake is a great thing as long as we learn from it. We don't want to make the same mistake twice. And if we make the mistake twice, then we sure in the heck don't want to make it what? Third time.
Hey, can I jump in there?
Yeah, please, Jeff, please.
Here's what I would say about that too, is it really is important to be, I think Mike said, brutally honest. And that's the mistake I see a lot of people make. Because he could have said, well, it's not my fault, I fumbled. It was wet outside. The lineman didn't block. It was a poor handoff. And then he wouldn't have worked on it and nothing would have changed. So we have to accept responsibility and say, hey, I need to do a better job of that. And then that's the only way it gets better.
You're way ahead of me, Jeff, because that was the next slide. This is Will Smith that says, doesn't matter whose fault it is that something is broken if it's your responsibility to fix it. So like Jeff said, maybe it was wet. Maybe it was a bad handoff. Maybe it was whatever. But whose job is it to fix it then? I better get better at taking handoffs when it's wet. I better get better at taking handoffs when they're not perfect. I better get better at holding onto the ball when I get hard. So he took responsibility to fix it. That runner did. Just like we have to take responsibility, saying, "Oh, you know what? They're all tire kickers and plate lickers. Oh, you know what? There's nobody coming to the seminar because all they want to do is eat on me." Guys, do we all have things that people want? Yes. Because if they don't want the things we have, I mean, if they don't want those goals that we have, holy cow! I don't know. The person, they must have one foot in the grave. So they want those things. So the only thing between what they want and those things is us. So if they don't want those things, it's our responsibility. So Jeff, whose responsibility is it if they do a 21-point checklist and then they don't move forward? Whose responsibility is it?
It's the advisor's responsibility.
So does that mean they should beat themselves up and say, go and start pounding themselves on the head and say, I'm so stupid, I can't learn this, can't teach an old dog to do it? No, what do they do with that information when they miss the 21 and and the client doesn't move forward?
They go back and listen and figure out what could I have done different or what could I have done better so that doesn't happen to me again.
Yes, and do they have to fix everything overnight?
No, you don't. You just have to fix one thing at a time.
Yeah, just one thing at a time, guys. So if it doesn't matter whose fault it is, if something's broken, if it's your responsibility to fix it, accepting responsibility is not an admission of guilt. Self-reflection is a humbling process. It's essential to find out why you think, say, and do certain things, then better yourself. So if I'm calling people that come to through my marketing, tire kickers and plate lickers, and I do some self-reflection, what should my self-reflection be? So Jeff, if you were calling people tire kickers and plate lickers, and you sat down and think, why am I calling these people tire kickers and plate lickers?
Well, then you have to wonder, am I trying to put the blame on them and not take the blame for myself? Yeah,
because I'm thinking, if we take a step back, if they're working with an advisor, apparently what? They weren't always a tire kicker and a plate licker. They're working with an advisor. So for me to say they're simply a tire kicker and a plate licker is not really accurate because somebody, and do you all remember the book that Jeff talked about, that guy down in Florida who his plan was to go to a lunch or dinner seminar 365 days. So one a day for a whole year. He only got through, I don't remember, something like 235 or something like that. So he didn't make it to the 365, but 235, that's a lot of seminars to go through. And guess what happened? Twice out of those 235 times, so less than 1% of the time, he did sit down with the advisor and move money or buy their services for whatever that thing was. So that means how many of those people, how many of those advisors he got in front of, how many of them were professionals and how many of them were amateurs? How many of those people were professionals? Because if he was a tire kicker and a plate licker, should he have sat down and done business with any of those people? No, he shouldn't have. If he was truly a tire kicker and plate licker, he shouldn't have worked with anybody, but he ended up working with 1% of them. It's because the 1%, what? They didn't treat him like a tire kicker and a plate licker. They treated him like somebody who needed their help. Does that make sense? So was this helpful? Did y'all get some ideas? And again, these things are these things, well, there is one radical thought today. One of the radical things we learned today was that, do people want new and exciting experience, or do they want something they know and already comfortable? See, that's counterintuitive. So that is something that we should maybe have learned today that we hadn't thought about before. But all this stuff that Ray Dalio is talking about, is that new, or is it already stuff we know? It's already stuff that we know. But sometimes we lose focus and don't do the things that we already know. So think about this. Think about how you're treating your staff. Think about how you're treating your relationships that you have with your marketing firms, with your wholesalers, with ECA, with 5Q, with think about how and what to expect with that relationship to make it a more of a meritocracy, to treat with fairness on both sides. Expect a lot from us. Expect a lot from us, and we expect a lot from you. Expect a lot from your staff. They're going to expect a lot from you. It's a fair thing, and it's a great way to go through life if you treat it with that open and radical transparency and truth. Make sense? Awesome. Well, thanks for being on the call today. You guys have a fantastic rest of the week, and we will talk to you all next Monday. Thanks, everybody.